I always think this is a good example of the weird Irish climate, because that's a giant holly tree.
Yeah.
And a palm tree there as well. There's very few places where they grow side by side.
So we're in Ireland, and we're exploring the, apparently it looks like a renaissance of Irish whiskey, but a renaissance has to come from a fairly low place. It's a rebirth, so what the hell happened in the first place?
I think we should find out.
Okay, let's go to a place where they may know a thing or two.
Maybe a building.
Like the archives.
Where Barry Crockett was born.
The archives of all Irish whiskey. Where are we right now? What building is this?
So this is what we call the distiller's cottage. This is where the master distiller traditionally lived. Goes back to 1794.
Yeah.
Now this was very normal. You know, all head distillers would have had a residence next to the distillery, because in the days before transportation, and it's a 24-hour job, you needed to be on site if something went wrong. So the last family to live here were the Crockett's, and they left in 1975, and after that you had to buy your own home. That was the end of that. But the cottage is here, and it's so iconic for us that it's been rejuvenated, and half of it is for corporate entertaining, and then the other half is actually our archive. And it's where we keep all the records relating to the companies that formed Irish distillers. So John Jameson and Son, founded in 1780, John Power and Son, 1791, and the Cork Distilleries Company, whose roots go back to 1779. So there's a lot of history in this building. So behind the doors there, we've got 5 strong rooms. They're all temperature controlled, they're humidity controlled. In this room here, a reading room, the lights, there's UV filters in all the lights, there's UV filters in all the windows. I always say that once you're in this building, you cannot age.
Yes,
So
we're never leaving.
Stay here as long as you can. So part of my role is I'm the custodian of those records. So I'm the archivist for Irish distillers, and I look after the records of the firm John Jameson and Son. And I try and share what I've learnt, both internally within the company, but also to people like yourselves who are interested.
So you just keep uncovering things as you go further. But
Literally.
Can I ask, at what point in the history of Jameson did they realize they needed to keep things? Or how much have you had to go looking for things?
No one ever realizes the need to keep things. Keep things.
See, that's what I was wondering.
And write names on photographs.
Yeah, for the love of God.
Print out your photos. What we were lucky in that the historic Jameson distillery at Bow Street, it was huge, you know, and it covered 7 acres, and there was a lot of buildings. So things tended to be shoved in corners. There were enough corners that you could shove things in. And when that distillery shut in 1975, the company was looking at all these records, you know, and it was the wage books of everyone who'd worked there. There were records of people that there's no other record for them.
Wow.
There's no birth cert, there's no death cert. So apart from their human DNA, the only record of them ever living and walking this earth is here in this archive. So they knew that it was really important, but they didn't know what to do. So they parcelled them all up, and there was 40 pallets of material. And that was given to the National Archives in Dublin for safekeeping until such time as the company had the resources to invest in, and that happened 7 years ago. So we took back the 40 pallets. So it took
Prep this whole building first.
Prep the whole building, exactly, because they had to inspect where these records were going.
Right.
So it had to be at the same standard as the National Archives.
Wow.
So it is built to International Museum standard. And I spent 5 years unwrapping pallets. And cleaning, putting things on shelves, to get to the point now where we can reveal an awful lot more of our history. And you see that in Bow Street in the recent refurbishment. All the information on the walls in Bow Street came from here.
Wow.
It's all documented. It is all factual. And this is something that really sets us apart, is that we have ownership of our history, and we protect our history. Now, we don't market ourselves. Jameson is ye olde Irish drinky. It's a fun drink, it's a contemporary drink, but it has a legacy.
Right.
And what allows us to be masters of distillation is this legacy, is this 200 years of experience. And that's what allows Jameson to be so experimental today. That's what's allowed us to bring out caskmates. It's what allowed us to bring out Method and Madness, because we know distilling inside out.
Have you ever found something that someone thought, I have this new amazing idea, and you go like, we've tried that this year.
What I've learned is keep my mouth shut. when they're down in the micro going, whoa, you won't believe what we're doing. I'm like, yeah, darling. You know? And then they come back and go, God, it didn't work. And I'm like, geez, who knew? You know?
I know, we saw it in the book.
But you can't tell people.
No, you can't.
You have to.
Gotta let them have their enthusiasm.
Yeah. It's not my job to crush anybody. I know. But anyway. So what I was going to do today is I've taken out a selection of items from the archive, and I'm going to bring you through the history of Jameson, and within that kind of the broader history of Irish whiskey.
Lovely,
So any photos you want to take, no problem at all. Any questions you want to ask, no
Just
problem
don't
at all.
touch it.
Just don't touch or sneeze.
That goes for you
You
too.
see, his hands are full.
No sneezing.
So I'm going to start you down here, and we're going to work our way around the table. Now, as everyone knows, Jameson was founded in 1780. It's on our labels, and our founder was a man called John Jameson. And he was a lawyer by trade, and he was just a very entrepreneurial person. And Dublin in the 1780s, in the Georgian era, it was a vibrant place. It was a happening place. It was the second city of the British Empire. It was quite affluent. In the shop windows, you got a lot of luxury goods from all over the world. It was somewhere that there was a lot of opportunity. So he came over to Dublin and established his distillery. There probably was already one on the site, and he took it over and slowly built it up. And in those early days, you don't even put your name over the door. You just start it. You don't have to register your company or anything like that. So we don't have an awful lot of records from the very, very early days. But what we have is an incredible treasure from his son, John Jameson II. And he's the son in John Jameson and Son. And he was a master distiller in his own right. And he was a hands-on distiller at Bow Street. And we know this because this is his personal pocket notebook in which he is recording the mash bills. This is from 1826. So this is the actual recipe for Jameson whiskey as distilled by John Jameson in Bow Street. And that's the type of legacy that we have that separates us from a lot of other distilleries. And Irish whiskey is going through a most wonderful boom at the moment.
It is.
And it's thanks to people like this who sowed the seeds quite a long time ago. So at the time that John Jameson is distilling, the distillery in Bow Street was exactly the size of our micro here on site.
Okay.
So what we could do if we wanted is reproduce these recipes.
At the micro.
But you know, it's already been done. It was done in 1826.
Yes.
Kind of why we're not really that interested in replicating the past. Not to say that we would never do that, but what our head distiller and the distillers in the micro want to do is use this for inspiration. Right. They go through these recipes, they pick out a certain thing, maybe it's a cereal that we don't normally use today, and they experiment with that. So we see it as more as a springboard.
Right.
But when I first came across this notebook, it was in bits. And so it had to be repaired. See, all the spine here has been repaired by a paper conservator. It's very specialised work. So what he did is he took it apart and took the spine out. And when he did that, this is what fell out.
Oh, he found barley.
And barley.
Wow.
It's barley that Jameson was being made out of in 1826.
Oh, that's amazing.
And you cannot get a more tangible link to your history than that.
You know he flipped out when he took that apart and that fell out.
Oh no, he was just like...
Immediately get on the phone.
No.
You won't believe.
I went down to collect it, and I was getting in my car driving away, and his assistant said, "Paul, you know the barley." Oh yeah, I forgot. And I was like,
God! You forgot 200-year-old barley?
You know?
How could you do that?
Because he deals with a lot of old stuff. So that's something. And so what this man did is he set the foundations for this. And this is Bow Street at its height in the 1880s. And this is it stretching over 7 acres of Dublin city centre. Now, originally it would have been in a greenfield site, in a very rural area. But it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is something really to take on board about Irish whiskey and Irish whiskey distillers historically. They thought big. They thought global. They were not interested in having a small little distillery distilling for a small handful of people. They wanted to get out there all over the world. And they had the confidence to do that because they knew that what they were producing was as good as, if not better, than a lot of the other spirits. So about 1880, by the time you see this, if you're a connoisseur and you're used to drinking a fine cognac or a fine champagne, you drink Irish whiskey. Right. And that's where it's sold, and that's the price point that it's at, because it's a premium drink. And we can see that in things like the labels. So then as now, whenever you go into a new territory, you have to have a specific label. So this is just showing you the reach that Jameson had. We have labels here from all across America, of course. We have Portugal, we have South America, Uruguay, we have China, we have India. In 1909, they're selling enough in Honolulu that there's a specific label for Honolulu. You know, that was something that I wasn't expecting, you know. Here are the labels from India in the 1920s. So it's truly global. And I think that's something that people don't really realise, what a global phenomenon Irish whiskey was. And the reason for that was the standard. It was at a very high standard. So this is a distillery ledger from Bow Street. This is the daily record that the head distiller would have kept. This is for 1888. And he's recording every single day what is being distilled. And he's doing it for two reasons. The first reason is you need to know how much duty is due. So the Inland Revenue are very interested in how much you are distilling then as now. You have to be very accurate, and you do not mess around with these guys.
Right.
You tell them exactly what's going on. So he's doing that, but the other thing that he's doing is he's recording when things go wrong, because things will go wrong. And it's how you deal with that and what you learn from it.
Weather very hot.
Barm, which is yeast,
Yeah.
soft and bad. So what he's saying there, because this is before refrigeration,
Right.
obviously, is in hot weather, it's July, don't buy in bulk. And you will never get a situation where this distiller retires on a Friday and the new guy comes in on Monday.
Right.
There's always apprenticeship, and there will be years of crossover. So all the knowledge that this man has built up by physically distilling is being passed on to the next guy as well. And that's why we feel here in Middleton we're almost the guardians or the custodians of Irish whiskey, because of all of this. So
These are old like typeset pages.
well, yeah,
Like
yeah.
one.
They would have got them done by a bookbinder on the
Yeah.
quays in Dublin, and then they would fill them in. So he
Right.
would have told them exactly, you know, what he wants. So these records serve as inspiration in lots of different ways for the company, not just the ways that you would imagine, you know, that new whiskey expressions, but we do have such a long history that when it comes to advertising or marketing, why make up something when you can just actually shine a light?
Right.
And the current campaign, Taste, that's why, that came out of these, because the creative agency came down and they said, well, what made Jameson special? Why was it so popular? And I said, it tasted good.
Yeah. Because people
And they're
like
there-
to drink
They
it.
like to drink it, and they're there going, there's something in that. But you know, that's what it boils down to. People like to drink
Did you get a
it.
percentage of the marketing
No, I
budget?
did not.
Ah, that's a mistake.
But in illustrating that, you know, they wanted to illustrate from something that really happened. So I went through the records here, and this is a day, this is 1888, and there's been a colossal error in the Bow Street distillery. This is really bad news for somebody. So what he's recording, you can see there's a lot of writing. He's saying the wash from number 2 back was started into number 1 wash still before the spent wash was discharged.
Oh,
so
no.
basically, this is triple distillation,
Yeah.
and a guy is trying to fill a still that's already full. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
So anyone else would have said, oh, say nothing, drain it, boil it up, we'll sell it cheap, it'll be fine. But not
Filled it to the
Jameson.
crown.
Yes.
And that's how they found out.
Yeah, because it was flooding all over. So Jameson get rid of it because the quality is everything to them and their reputation is everything. So there's a huge financial hit on this. So the normal...
So wait a minute. It was thought best by JGJ,
that's,
right?
John George Jameson, who's...
So he went and asked Jameson.
Oh yeah, like this went to the top.
Yeah,
This went
of
to
course
the
it
top.
did. It's like, all right, we gotta talk to the boss.
He thought best to discharge the spent wash, hence the deficiency.
Yeah.
So I'm covering now. So what normally happens in a situation like this, you have to find out what went wrong, because you don't want this happening again.
Right.
You know? And the Irish thing is we do have this almost phobia of pointing the finger at anybody or blaming anybody for anything. So the normal thing would be, you'd say, Carl, were you there? And I'd go, tea break, actually, I wasn't there. And you might go, Tommy, were you around? Well, I had a group in, was that the time? I'm out of here. You don't dob people in. But this is too important. So he writes down at the end, Scully was they finger the guy.
They just called him out.
They do.
For 200 years, 130 years, he's been called out in
that's the
public.
guy.
You bastard Scully.
Because we have the full collection here, I was able to go back to the wage books and find out who's this guy.
Yeah. Did you
So-
find his last paycheck?
I did. So it's Bill Scully, and he had started work a couple of years earlier in the brew house. And
Okay.
that's the first stage of making whiskies,
Right.
when you make a beer. And he obviously did really well. He was obviously really bright because they promoted him to the spirit house, which is where you want to be.
Whoops.
It's the centre of distillation. And on this particular day, the wage books show that there were 2 older guys out sick.
He was all by himself.
He was all by himself. He was newly promoted.
Didn't want to ask for help, just tried to figure it out.
He screwed up. And they didn't fire Scully. They just said, do you know what, Bill? You were good in the brew house. So he goes back to the brew house and he has a 40-year career with Jameson.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
And he told that story the rest of, or didn't tell that story the rest of his life. Yeah. He's like, Dad, why'd you go back to the brew house? He's like, oh, I just liked it better.
And if you go onto YouTube and Google Scully was to blame, Jameson, you'll find an advertising campaign around this.
Oh, that's so good.
And today we have an educational facility in Dublin for bartenders who come over to visit us, and we call it Scully's.
Please tell me that you sell shirts that say Scully was to blame.
Well, we will now.
That's it. I would buy that shirt all day long.
Or you could go, I blamed Scully.
Yeah.
So at the time that they're making this whiskey, and poor old Scully is, having night sweats, Jameson was being sold in bulk rather than being bottled the way that you go in, today into a liquor store and you buy your bottle. You buy it in bulk if you're a publican. So you buy it by the cask or by what's called the jug, and that those are usually gallon stoneware jugs. Right. And the publican would decant it himself using labels supplied by the distillery.
Okay, so that's why it had instructions over there.
Yes,
right? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So you can see on this one, it's John Jameson and Son. It's a 10-year-old, but it's bottled by Francis McNamara in Galway. And equally, you see this one, bottled by H. Macaulay in Cavan, Clones, Boyle, Clontarf and Dublin. And this one is an American label. They came up with a snazzy little logo there. And it is by their importer, W.A. Taylor & Co. in New York. But the issue is that you lose a bit of control. So you're making fabulous whiskey, right, and you've sold a fabulous whiskey, but is the consumer getting to drink that?
Is he watering it down? Are they adding things to it?
So they go to a lot of trouble to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's what this book is here. And these are all legal contracts with all the publicans in Ireland.
So if you go through far enough, you find that person's name in there.
You will. Who are bottling themselves. And so the sales rep goes in, he says, before we give you any whiskey, you're signing this, and they sign it once a year. And it is stamped, so it's a legal document, and here's the bottler, the publican, James Lawler, and he's saying, I will not adulterate it. But what is brilliant, what I love about these, is that because it's a legal document, it had to be witnessed. So you get the list of who's hanging around in the pub in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
This is 1925.
Who just happened to be there.
Who just happened to be in there. So this guy is a solicitor's apprentice. What the hell is he doing in the pub? He should be out. He should be soliciting. This guy is a grocery manager. This fellow's a tailor. Good luck with the sewing after that.
Yeah,
this one is a clerk, There's a lot of clerks.
A lot of clerks, yeah. They took long breaks.
This guy's a chemist.
All right.
Not sure what he's going to be prescribing you. But what you get out of these is a snapshot of Irish society.
Right.
And the place that the pub played as the centre for Irish society. So with these, you could actually recreate every pub in Ireland. You could make a fantastic virtual tour through the pubs and the people and the characters. So it's much more than just our whiskey history, because our whiskey history is part of wider Irish history. And that's why we preserve these. So they had these, and they would take a court case. They had pub spies, and they'd send people in who'd order a glass, put it into a little bottle, bring it back to the lab. Fully Jameson, they would sue because it mattered to them. But they also had this...
That's the earliest secret shopper program.
It is. They had this handy reckoner as well, that when you order your glass, it should look like that. So you hold it up, and if it doesn't match, you bust it. So they're consumer facing in a very, very active way.
And how early was this?
These are all the 1920s.
Man.
But they would have been doing this throughout the 1880s.
Well, and this is around the time, within a few decades, of when America did the Pure Food and Drug Act. Yeah. And it was specifically to stop people from screwing with things and make it a legal situation.
Yeah. So they're making this fantastic whiskey, but who is making it?
Right.
That's the important thing. And these are one of the wage books from Bow Street, and we have over 100 years of these. And you have the name of everybody who's employed in Bow Street and what they're doing, how much they're paid. And for us, this is really the gold mine in the archive, because without these people, there wouldn't have been a distillery, and there wouldn't have been Jameson, and we wouldn't have jobs here today.
This is the human face.
So what we've done to try and create a memorial for these people is, when you go to our brand home at Bow Street, and there's a fabulous bar there, and if you look at the furniture, carved along all the side of the furniture are these names. Because these are the people without whom none of our success right now would have been possible. And Jameson was renowned as a good employer. It had this reputation, and had the reputation that as long as you could turn up for work, they would continue to employ you. Now, that doesn't maybe sound so great to us, that when you're 80, you're crawling into work. But in an era without social security and without an old age pension, and if you didn't have a family to look after you, if you could get a wage, that was really, really important. So what they would do is just give you a softer and softer and softer job, to the point where you're just sitting on a stool inside the door, just going tick, you went in, tick, somebody went out, have a little snooze, but they would pay you. And what this shows is actually that commitment. This is for the week ending May the 5th, 1916. So this is a hugely important date in Irish history. This is the Easter Rising. This is the last rebellion that took place that gave us our freedom, and it led to the beginning of the Republic of Ireland. And it was a very, very violent week. There was an awful lot of trauma. I think people really underestimate this. The rebels took over a number of buildings, including Bow Street Distillery. Now, it was the weekend, there was no distilling happening, thank God, so there was no violence in taking it over, but they barricaded themselves in. And along the streets outside, the army, of course, tried to get it back. And so you have literally people being shot in the street in front of their families. And when the army couldn't find males to shoot, they would just kick in the doors of homes, they would pull out whatever man they could find, and they would shoot him. And all of these employees lived locally, so they would have seen this horrific violence on the streets. Now, at the time, the rules are that if you don't turn up for work, you're not paid. This is the norm in a kind of Victorian era company. And the best example of that I can give you is the Titanic. When the Titanic sunk, the wages of the survivors were stopped for the second that it went down. So when they came, after this horrible experience, to try and get what money they were owed, they were told, well, you didn't work.
Yeah, you're just on a lifeboat.
You're on a lifeboat, you weren't actually contributing anything, so we're not paying you, so go away.
Brutal.
Horrific. So for Bow Street, obviously nobody could come in because it'd been totally taken over. And there's just this little pencil note up here, and it just says, owing to rebellion, all employees paid full this week. Because they recognised that the employees had seen some horrific things, had gone through incredible trauma, and stopping somebody's wage was not going to help that.
Right.
So they broke the mould a bit. So we can see that they were very, very good employers. And you see that in the bottle. From the 1920s, this little guy, he's the Jameson barrelman. And he appears in the 1920s. Now, originally his function, he's an age signifier on the bottle. So this is 3-star whiskey, and that means 7-year-old whiskey. And you can see on his little barrel V11, Roman numerals for 7. But he symbolises everybody here. And for us today, he's still our emblem. And when you look at the modern bottle, you'll find him. He's on a number of places.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And that's for us just saying that all of us, we play a part. And another thing I always say is that you can be the head distiller, you can be Brian Nation Distilling, but if the guy whose job it is to open the gate doesn't turn up, you're not coming in. So we're all barrelmen. And that's something that's been true for 100 years with Jameson, which is something that kind of, I feel, again sets us apart. That there is this inclusive attitude which is real. It's not somebody coming, from a HR department saying, you've got to be inclusive now. This is the way we always did things. And it's important for us now, as we get bigger and more successful, that we remember how we always did things. So we tend to think that we're big, thank God, but we've got a small brand mindset in dealing with people. And what the archive can do for us is it tells us who was there and what they were doing and everything like that. But it can add a little bit more. It can, what was it like to work in Bow Street? Was it nice? Were people nice to you? Did you look forward to coming in? Did you have a bit of fun? Was there crack there? And this is a record from the cooperage in Bow Street. And let me just open it there. This is 1925. I'm fixated on the 1920s. So at the time, coopers were paid by piecework. So that means depending on how much you produce, so your wage is going to differ every week.
Right.
So if you come in and you work like the clappers and you make a load of barrels, you will get X amount. If you've had a few too many the night before and you can't take the noise and you're sitting in the corner, you're actually not going to earn. And that was the way that the coopers wanted things. That's how they asked. So the job of the foreman cooper was to record all the coopers who turn up for work, but the different size of the casks that they're making.
Right.
Because you can make 3 small ones and maybe 1 big one, and you get paid more for the 1 big one. So that's the job of the foreman cooper, and he would give that then to the wages clerk, who calculates the money and gives you your money. But what's happened here, this is May 1925, the foreman cooper has made a note here, and one of the coopers, who's a man called Byrne, he's out sick. And he says, Byrne sick since February 27th. Now it's May. So that means he's earned nothing. Now, Dublin in the 1920s was a difficult place to live. It had the worst slums in Europe. It was renowned in a really bad way for the terrible, terrible housing for the working population. Not just the unemployed, but for the working population. So this man does not own his home. There's no way. He rents, and he's behind in the rent. And if he gets evicted and he falls down into that poverty trap, he's not coming back up.
Right.
And if he has a family, right now, that family are hungry. It's not that you're going without a holiday or you're not getting new clothes. They're physically hungry. Now, the Coopers Society would have stepped in, that was their trade union, and would have been subventing the family, but this has gone on too long and that's going to have dried up. So what the foreman Cooper records is Byrne out sick since February 27, left a few casks, and he gives the sizes unfinished. Shop volunteers finished the lot this week. They're therefore credited to his account. 2 weeks later, he's back. It could have been a broken leg, a broken arm, but like his buddies at the end of a long day. Now this isn't, just typing. This is hard physical work. They start again because they're not going to let one of their own go down. And that's the type of atmosphere, this very supportive teamwork and, friendship-based atmosphere. And again, for us as a modern company, that's how we want to do things. We don't want to forget about this. So anytime we get a new member of our leadership team, they're brought down to the archive and they're shown, okay, you might have great ideas about marketing and all this sort of stuff, but this is how you will behave, because this is how we have always behaved. And when something is real, you respond to it, and that is, I'm sure you found this walking around, everyone is very pleasant, everyone is very nice, and I think it's an underrated word, nice, just be nice, what's wrong with that, But now, having said all of that, it wasn't some sort of paradise to be working in. There's rules and regulations that you have to follow, and there's also temptation. If you're working in a distillery, you're not going to be human unless you get a little bit tempted.
The punishments.
The punishment book.
I like that it's actually titled.
It is.
The punishment book.
Yeah, and this is punishment book.
We just
from
needed
Bow
to be
Street.
clear.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to start one of those for my boys.
You should.
Yeah.
You should.
It's just going to be labeled the punishment book. We'll keep it in the living room.
I was going to start one for our channel.
Oh,
Just
okay.
all the ways that I punish you.
Yeah. Those are all right locked in here, my friend.
That's a different channel.
I don't. Yeah, that one will get us banned.
There's weather involved.
Yeah.
We'll gloss over that one. But anyway, so in the distillery, there had to be certain rules and regulations. A lot of the people who work there, they're related. You've got uncles, cousins, fathers, sons. There's a very kind of convivial atmosphere, but there are certain things that are kind of important. One of them is don't blow up the distillery.
Yeah,
they kind
that's
of
a
like
big
that. Because in the 1940s, this is from 1949, almost everybody smoked. It was just a natural thing. And you smoked while you're on the telephone, you smoked while you're talking to somebody. And that's an issue when you've got 1 million gallons of alcohol. A miscast cigarette is a big problem. Now, working in the distillery, you would get your grog, your glass of whiskey morning and evening, but that sometimes would only whet the appetite. So you would have people whose sole mission in coming to work would be to see how much whiskey they could steal. And the company was, kind of tolerant enough of this, because if you put that much temptation in front of somebody and they're tempted, well, really, seriously. What they didn't like, and what they couldn't stand over, is if you stole whiskey and took it off the premises. Because then you're not robbing just the distillery, you're robbing the inland revenue.
Right.
And that's a big deal, because they could shut you down in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah.
And they still have incredible power. So you did not piss off the revenue. So if somebody is kind of smoking inappropriately, that is an issue. And if they're robbing you blind, that is an issue.
Turns out it's a problem.
It's a little problem. So here we have the punishment book, beginning 1st of January.
Being a record.
Being a record. And so you get the list of the guys, where they're working, the misdemeanor, what they've done. And you can see here, smoking, 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 smoking.
I got busted for pilfering.
Smoking, 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 smoking. But, so you have to be punished. So what do they do? And the easiest thing to do is you stop somebody's wages. But that doesn't really punish the man. That punishes his family.
Right.
That punishes the wife and the children who are dependent on his wages. So they're very clever about this. What they do is they stop his grog. They stop his free whiskey.
No, they cut him off.
They cut him off. So he has to watch everyone else queuing up, going, cheers, bottoms up, glug. And he's standing there twiddling his thumbs. And his no name pops up twice. Once you've had a week or
the shame.
without your free drink, you learn your lesson. But I think too, it just shows the kind of humanity of the management.
And look at this, there's a space. This is like a bookkeeping ledger, right? Because you've got a space between names that lets you have a start and stop time on punishment.
Yeah.
Right? Like a debit and credit column.
Yeah.
Right?
And this are the initials of the head distiller. He was a man called Bishop at this time. So he's the one in charge. But again, I think it shows the humanity of the management there, that you have to have rules, you have to run things, and you cannot have your premises being blown up because the guy wants a cigarette behind the still house. But they do it in a way that is considerate, of the wider issues. So what you have is you have a fabulous premises, you have incredible whiskey, you have a worldwide reach, you have a committed and engaged workforce. So why haven't you been drinking Irish whiskey since the day you were 21?
I drank it earlier. I'm just saying.
16.
I'm feeling a little put on the spot right now.
Drink where, Daddy?
I started drinking it at 19 when I was in Scotland. I was drinking Irish whiskey.
Okay, you're
actually.
in Scotland. That's okay.
Yeah.
Irish whiskey, from this wonderful point in the 1880s up to about 1900, was the drink of choice. It was, if you wanted to impress somebody, you said, would you like an Irish whiskey? And they were impressed. And they would savour it and they would sniff it and they'd be holding it up to the light and all this sort of stuff. And then by the 1960s, you can't even get it on the shelf anywhere. What went wrong? And it's not any one reason. This is the whole thing. And it was nothing that the distillers did. Right. Absolutely nothing. It's external political events, one after the other. And it starts with World War I.
Yeah.
And Ireland is an island, and the whiskey was export driven, and there was an awful lot of submarine activity around the island. So shipping is curtailed. Mm-hmm. It is stopped. So they say, right, nothing to be done about this, but it'll be over in a few years, so we'll put our heads down. And in 1919, they have their best distilling season ever. They produce their maximum amount of whiskey in Jameson. And that is unfortunate, because at the end of 1919 is when Prohibition hits.
Yes, it is.
So it wasn't the economic blow of Prohibition, because although they were exporting to America, it wasn't the main market. And they're selling to India, they're selling to New Zealand, they're selling to Australia, they're selling to Canada. So they're still exporting like mad. What happens in America is the loss of reputation that they suffer.
Because they're taking those bottles and refilling them with who knows what.
Absolutely. Because the moonshiners cottoned on pretty quickly that people were used to paying more for Irish whiskey. It was the premium drink. So if they filled those bottles with whatever shite they had, they could charge more for it. And people are drinking this and they're thinking it's Irish whiskey. And that's when you begin to hear, I don't like Irish whiskey, it's fiery or it's burny. It was never fiery or burny. It was always, had that triple distilled smoothness to it. It was never a rough drink. But this sort of permeates the mindset, this is rough. So meanwhile, in the 1930s, we go into an economic trade war with Britain. And that's when you lose any territory associated with the British Empire. That's when we lose India, we lose Canada, we lose New Zealand, we lose Australia. America's already gone for us, and all the rest then really constricting. And it's like dominoes. Distillery closes, 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 closes. And what happens then is the Second World War. And so the few that are left can't export off the island. And you go into the 1950s, and the Irish government has a great idea. It says, why don't we cap exports? So that's the finish of it. And so Old Middleton, where we are now, you know, which is a huge distillery, there were years in the 1950s that it was only distilling for 3 weeks a year. Because that's all the sale of their whiskey they had.
No point in putting it away if it can't go anywhere.
If you can't go anywhere. And you think, well, why weren't they exporting? They're broke. They're broke. You know, they had men in the payroll that they were keeping on the payroll, and they were selling no whiskey. You had guys painting walls, fixing roofs, digging out mill streams, but they're not selling any whiskey. They're broke. And so it gets to the point where there's only 3 distilleries left in Southern Ireland, in the Republic. You got Powers in Dublin, Jameson in Dublin, and down here the Middleton Distillery. That's it. There's nobody else making whiskey, and their market has all shrunk to the island. Now they try in the 1960s, they try these new campaigns, they use Irish coffee as a vehicle, but they don't have the money in the bank, you know, to follow this up. And they're really crawling along, and something radical has to happen, and something radical did. Each of those firms was still owned and run by the founding families, who had been running each firm for over 200 years. They were known to each other, they had worked together, but they're deeply suspicious, they're business rivals. But they meet, and they meet in the home of Shane Jameson, and it's put on the table. If they stay in conflict or in competition, they will destroy each other, and Irish whiskey will be gone. This wonderful drink, you know, that was lauded the world over, will be gone, because the only people who know how to make it are the people in that room. So they decide to do something incredibly radical, and they merge. And they form Irish Distillers. And this is the last ditch attempt to save the Irish whiskey category. And they have to rationalise. And they look at the Dublin distilleries, and Bow Street, it had begun in a greenfield site, the same with Powers John's Lane. It's now surrounded by the city centre. You can't get a tanker in and out. They're no longer fit for purpose. Here down in Middleton, the old Middleton distillery was on a farm. So there was lots of green fields. So they decide they're going to pool all their money, and they're going to build Europe's most modern distillation plant. It's going to have state-of-the-art technology that means they can reproduce the style of whiskey from the 3 distilleries, and that's what they do. And the plant is a tremendous success, but they're still not selling a lot of whiskey. So they have another crisis meeting, and they say, what are we going to do? And they get in a lot of external consultants, and they all say the same thing. You have to focus on one. You have to pick one, and you have to put all your energy behind that. And the one that they pick is Jameson. And at the time, you still have on the board members of the Powers family, members of the Murphy's family who ran Middleton, and they all agree to this. So all the effort is put behind Jameson, but it's still really not getting anywhere. And the game changer for Irish whiskey is 1988. And that's when Irish Distillers merges with Pernod Ricard. And overnight, what Pernod Ricard gave us is a distribution network.
Yeah, just a channel.
That was it.
Yeah.
That was all that
Just
was needed.
needed a channel.
Yeah, and that's the one thing we couldn't do, because we just didn't have the resources. So all of a sudden, you see that distinctive green bottle on supermarket shelves, you see it in bars, and people start drinking it, and they like it, because it tastes good.
And it's in every bar. I don't care where you are and how small the bar is, even Texas. If you walk in and you ask for it, you're going to find Jameson.
Thank God.
Yeah.
And slowly, as people begin to drink it again, and they go, God, this is really nice. And our entire marketing strategy has been simply to put a glass in somebody's hand and let them taste it, because the drink speaks for itself. So after 1988, things start to get better. And you get to the point now that Jameson has reopened the Irish whiskey category. And back here in Ireland, we're in this wonderful cusp where there's all these new distilleries beginning again. And the whole purpose of Irish Distillers coming together was to act as this umbrella. That we could have what we have now, which are the new distilleries starting. So that when you go in to your bar in Texas, you're going to have this fantastic choice, all of a high standard. That's the only thing we ask of the new entrants, is just keep up the standard, because we've seen what can happen when the standard drops, or when there's a perception that the standard drops. So here in Middleton Distillery, we have a program by which we mentor a lot of the new entrants, because they've never done it before.
Right.
And what a lot of people find out is there isn't this pool of unemployed distillers in Ireland,
right.
you know, because there just isn't. So a lot of people just don't know what to do. So we share that knowledge. We share everything we've learned over the 200 years to keep up the standard of Irish whiskey. So you get from the point that it was this global drink, and we're getting back there. And it's just a brilliant time to be involved in Irish whiskey. It's a really, really exciting and good time.
Absolutely.